I was in the kitchen making lunch when I heard my daughter-in-law on the phone. "That old woman just lives off us. I can't stand it anymore." Her words cut through my chest like a blade, but I kept stirring the pot in silence. If she knew the truth about who really pays the bills in this house, she might think twice before speaking like that. They called me a burden, said I was bleeding them dry, living off their generosity like some parasite who'd overstayed her welcome. 3 years I'd been in their house, 3 years since Harold passed and left me with nothing but memories and a worn wedding ring I still twist around my finger when the loneliness gets too heavy to bear. My daughter-in-law, Sarah, made sure I knew exactly what she thought of me. Not with screaming or dramatic confrontations, mind you. Sarah was too clever for that, too calculating. She had a way of cutting you down with surgical precision, her words slicing through your dignity so cleanly you didn't realize you were bleeding until later. Alone in your room, staring at the ceiling and wondering how you'd become so small. "Mom's getting expensive," she'd say to my son Michael, not bothering to lower her voice when I was folding laundry just around the corner. "The grocery bills, gone up $50 a week since she moved in. And don't get me started on the utilities. She keeps that room so hot, and the hot water." She'd trail off with that particular sigh she'd perfected, the one that said volumes about sacrifice and martyrdom. Michael would make those non-committal sounds men make when they're caught between two women they love, or think they love. And yeah, and I know, honey. Never defending me, never standing up, just existing in that gray space between loyalty and cowardice. I understood, I suppose. Marriage is its own kind of prison sometimes, and Sarah held the keys. But here's what they didn't know, what nobody knew. Every morning at 7:30 sharp, I'd put on my walking shoes and tell them I was going to visit the little chapel on Maple Street. "Need my prayer time," I'd say, and Sarah would roll her eyes like I was some superstitious old fool clinging to fairy tales. She'd make comments about how I had plenty of time to pray since I wasn't contributing anything useful to the household. The truth was, I did go to the chapel. Father Martinez had been expecting me every Tuesday for the past 3 years, ever since I'd made that first donation that paid for the new roof. But the chapel was just one stop on a route that would have made their jaws drop if they'd known. First the chapel, then the bank on 5th Street, then sometimes the lawyer's office, or the real estate company, or the investment firm where my portfolio manager Patricia would greet me like the valued client I was. You see, when Harold died, everyone assumed I was left with nothing. The funeral was modest, the house was sold, and I moved in with my only child looking like exactly what they expected, a grieving widow with nowhere else to go. What they didn't see was the carefully orchestrated financial dance I'd been performing for decades, the web of investments and properties and quiet business deals that Harold and I had built together, brick by brick, dollar by dollar. Harold always said the smartest money was invisible money. "Let them think you're struggling, Eleanor," he'd tell me. "Rich people have targets on their backs, but poor people get help." He was right, as usual. When people think you have nothing, they show you who they really are. Sarah showed me exactly who she was every single day. Like the time she suggested I should apply for food stamps to help with the grocery situation. Or when she started leaving assisted living brochures on the kitchen counter, always open to the pages about payment plans and financial assistance. "Just thinking ahead, Mom," she'd say to Michael when I'd find them. "We need to be realistic about the future." The future. If only she knew. I'd been testing them, you understand. Not consciously at first, but gradually, deliberately. When their business started struggling, Michael's little contracting company had hit some rough patches. I watched how they handled the stress. I watched how quickly Sarah's thin veneer of tolerance began to crack when real pressure was applied. "We can't afford her anymore," Sarah announced one evening in October. I was in the kitchen, pretending to be absorbed in washing dishes while they sat at the dining room table surrounded by bills and bank statements. "We're behind on the mortgage, Michael. The credit cards are maxed out. Your mother needs to start contributing or find somewhere else to live. The dish slipped from my soapy hands and clattered in the sink. They both looked up, and I could see Sarah calculating how much I'd overheard, whether she cared if I had. Mom helps around the house, Michael said weakly. She cooks, cleans, watches the kids. That's not enough anymore. Sarah's voice had that edge it got when she was building up to something big. I've been looking into senior housing options. There are some nice places with payment plans. She might even qualify for assistance. I dried, my hands slowly, taking time to fold the dish towel just so. When I turned around, they were both watching me with expressions I'd grown familiar with. Michael's guilty concern and Sarah's barely concealed impatience. I've always taken care of myself, I said quietly. I don't expect to be a burden to anyone. Sarah's laugh was sharp, bitter. Mom, you're 72 years old. You haven't worked in decades. Taking care of yourself isn't really an option anymore, is it? That night, I lay in bed listening to them argue through the thin walls. Sarah's voice rising and falling in waves of frustration, Michael's responses getting shorter and more defensive. Words floated through, responsibility and sacrifice and realistic expectations. I pulled the blanket up to my chin and thought about the statements that would arrive in my P.O. box next week, the quarterly reports, the rental income, from 3 properties Sarah had never seen. The next morning was Tuesday, chapel day. I put on my best walking shoes and my navy cardigan, kissed my grandchildren goodbye, and ignored Sarah's pointed comment about another prayer marathon. Father Martinez was waiting with tea and that gentle smile of his. Eleanor, right on time. How are the children? Growing so fast, I said, settling into the chair across from his desk. Little Emma's reading chapter books now, and James is starting to show real interest in baseball. And your family? How are they managing? I took a sip of tea, considering my words. Father Martinez knew about my situation, had been my confidant through some of my hardest decisions. They're struggling, Father. Financially, emotionally. The pressure is showing. And they still don't know? I shook my head. Sarah suggested senior housing yesterday, with payment assistance. Father Martinez was quiet for a long moment. You could tell them, Eleanor. End this charade. Could I? And then what? Watch them transform overnight into loving relatives motivated by inheritance prospects? See Sarah suddenly become the devoted daughter-in-law? Watch Michael wrestle with guilt over how they've treated me? I set down my teacup. No, Father. I need to see who they really are when they think I have nothing to offer but problems. After the chapel, I walked to First National, where Mrs. Patterson in the Wealth Management Division always greeted me personally. We reviewed my portfolio, discussed some property acquisitions I was considering, and she updated me on the trust fund I'd established for my grandchildren's education. Money they'd never see if their parents' current behavior continued. The market's been good to you this quarter, Mrs. Morrison, she said, sliding the quarterly statement across her mahogany desk. Your diversified approach is really paying off. I glanced at the numbers, figures that would have solved every financial problem Michael and Sarah were facing, with enough left over to buy 3 more houses like the one I was supposedly draining them to maintain. Thank you, Patricia. I want to make another anonymous contribution to the community center's meal program. $5,000 should get them through the winter. Of course. Same discretion protocol? Always. The walk home took me past the elementary school where Emma and James played during recess. I stopped to watch through the fence, 2 beautiful children who had no idea their grandmother could give them everything they'd ever dreamed of, if only their mother could show an ounce of genuine kindness instead of calculating tolerance. When I got home, Sarah was on the phone with what sounded like another assisted living facility. She looked up when I entered, not bothering to disguise what she was doing. Yes, "We're looking for something affordable," she was saying. "My mother-in-law is on a very limited fixed income. No family assets to speak of." She paused, listening. "Medicaid? Yes, she might qualify for assistance." I walked past her to the kitchen, where Emma was sitting at the counter with homework spread out in front of her. 9 years old and already showing signs of the intelligence that ran in our family, the same sharp mind that had helped me build everything Sarah was so eager to dispose of. "How was school, sweetheart?" Emma looked up with Harold's eyes, bright blue and curious. "Good, Grandma. We're learning about the Great Depression. Did you know some people got really rich during that time by being smart about money?" I smiled, ruffling her dark hair. "Yes, I did know that. What else did you learn?" "That sometimes people who look poor are really rich, and people who look rich are really poor. Our teacher says it's about being smart with your money and not showing off." From the living room, I could hear Sarah still talking about payment assistance and monthly rates. If only she knew that the poor old woman she was trying to warehouse could buy the entire assisted living facility and turn it into a community center if the mood struck me. "That's very wise, Emma. Your teacher sounds smart." "She is. She says rich people who help others without bragging about it are the best kind of rich people." I kissed the top of her head and started preparing dinner, the same routine I'd maintained for 3 years. Cooking for people who saw me as a burden while planning their next move to get rid of me, all while sitting on enough wealth to change their lives completely. That evening, Michael came home looking defeated. The business was worse than they'd let on, apparently. I heard snippets of conversation. Lost the Johnson contract, can't make payroll, might have to let Tommy go. After dinner, while I was cleaning up, Sarah approached me with a folder full of brochures. "Mom, we need to talk," she said, her voice taking on that fake, gentle tone she used when she was about to deliver bad news. "Michael's business is going through a rough patch, and we simply can't afford to support 3 adults anymore. I've found some really nice places that work with seniors on fixed incomes." I dried my hands and turned to face her. This woman, who'd spent 3 years making me feel like an unwanted guest in what was supposed to be a family home. "I understand you're under pressure, Sarah. I'm glad you're being reasonable about this. Some of these places are actually quite nice, and with the assistance programs. What if I told you I could help with the financial problems?" Sarah blinked, then laughed. "Mom, that's sweet. But unless you've got a secret fortune hidden away somewhere." I looked at her for a long moment. This woman who was so certain she knew exactly what I was worth, so convinced she understood the limits of my world. What if I did? Sarah's laughter died in her throat. She stared at me like I just claimed I could fly to the moon, her mouth opening and closing without sound. For a moment, the kitchen was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator humming and the distant sound of Emma practicing piano in the living room. "I'm sorry. What did you just say?" I asked what if I did have money to help. I kept my voice level. Casual, like we were discussing the weather. Hypothetically speaking. Sarah's eyes narrowed. She was calculating, always calculating, trying to figure out if this was some kind of game or if dementia was finally setting in. "Mom, you don't have any money. Your Social Security barely covers your medications." I nodded slowly. "That's what you think. That's what I know." Her voice was getting sharper now, impatience bleeding through. "Look, I understand this is hard to accept, but facing reality is the first step. You can't contribute financially because you don't have anything to contribute. That's just a fact." Michael appeared in the doorway, drawn by the tension in Sarah's voice. "What's going on?" "Your mother thinks she can help us financially," Sarah said, not taking her eyes off me. "She's having some kind of episode." "I'm not having an episode." I folded the dish towel carefully, precisely. "I'm simply saying that perhaps you don't know everything about my situation." Michael looked between us, confused. Mom, what are you talking about? When Dad died, you sold the house and moved in here because you needed help. Did I say I needed help? Or did you assume I needed help? The question hung in the air like smoke. Sarah was getting agitated now, her carefully maintained composure starting to crack. This is ridiculous. You're 72 years old. You haven't worked in decades, and your husband left you with nothing but debt. I know this because I helped Michael go through all the paperwork when you moved in. You went through some paperwork, I corrected. You saw what I let you see. Sarah laughed, but it sounded forced. Oh, this is rich. What are you suggesting, that you've been hiding money from us? Playing some kind of elaborate game? I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I walked to the counter where she'd left all those assisted living brochures, picked them up, and dropped them into the trash can. The sound of glossy paper hitting the bottom echoed louder than it should have. The Meadowbrook facility looks nice, I said conversationally. $3,000 a month for a shared room. Sunrise Manor is pricier, $4,000 for a private room, but they have that nice courtyard. Did you know I could buy both of those facilities tomorrow and still have enough left over to pay off your mortgage and Michael's business debt? The silence that followed was deafening. Emma's piano practice stopped abruptly, as if the whole house was holding its breath. That's not funny, Sarah whispered. I'm not trying to be funny. Michael stepped into the kitchen fully now, his face pale. Mom, what are you saying? I looked at my son, this man who'd let his wife talk about discarding me like an old appliance for 3 years, and felt something crack open in my chest. I'm saying that maybe it's time you both learned who you've really been living with. Sarah was shaking her head frantically. No, this is some kind of delusion. Michael, we need to call her doctor. This is exactly what happens when elderly people start losing their grip on reality. My grip on reality is just fine, Sarah. It's your grip on reality that's been a little shaky. I walked to my purse, pulled out my phone, and dialed Patricia's direct line. She answered on the second ring. Mrs. Morrison, how nice to hear from you. How can I help you this evening? Patricia, I need you to fax something to my son's house. The summary sheet from my last quarterly review. Just the account balances, nothing detailed. I rattled off Michael's fax number, which I'd memorized years ago from watching him conduct his business. Of course. Should I include the property portfolio summary as well? Just the liquid assets for now. And Patricia, make sure the letterhead, it is clear. I want them to see it's from First National's Wealth Management Division. Absolutely. Give me 5 minutes. I hung up and looked at my family. Sarah was gripping the counter so hard her knuckles were white. Michael looked like he'd been hit by a truck. That's impossible, Sarah said. You bank at Community Credit Union. I've seen your statements. I have a checking account at Community Credit Union, I corrected, for groceries and incidentals. My real accounts are elsewhere. The fax machine in Michael's home office started whirring. We all heard it, that mechanical sound that was about to change everything. Michael walked toward the sound like a man in a trance, and we followed him. The paper came through slowly, line by line, revealing First National Bank's official letterhead, then Patricia's contact information, then my name in bold letters, then numbers that made Sarah gasp audibly. Checking account, 47,832.18 towards savings account, 156,940.33 money market. Account, $89,405.67, certificate of deposit, $250,000, investment portfolio, $2,147,293.45, real estate holdings, $1,190,000 Azings estimated value. Michael picked up the paper with trembling hands. This says you have over $5 million. 5.2, actually. That's a conservative estimate on the real estate. Sarah snatched the paper from Michael's hands, her eyes scanning the numbers frantically. This has to be fake. You don't. Where did this come from? 47 years of marriage to a very smart man who taught me that the best investment strategy is patience and invisibility. Harold and I started with nothing, Sarah. Nothing but a willingness to work hard and live below our means while we built something real. I walked to Michael's desk, pulled out a chair, and sat down. My legs were suddenly unsteady, not from age, but from the weight of finally telling the truth. When Harold got sick, we liquidated the visible assets. The house, his business, the things that looked impressive but weren't really making us money. We used that to pay for his care and make it look like we'd spent everything. But the real wealth, the investments and rental properties and business partnerships, those we kept hidden. Sarah was still staring at the paper. But why? Why would you pretend to be poor? Why would you let us think? Why would I let you think what? That I was a burden? That I was costing you money? Sarah, I didn't let you think anything. You decided what I was worth the moment I walked through that door. The truth of it hit her like a physical blow. I could see it in her face, the realization that every cruel comment, every suggestion about assisted living, every calculation about my cost to their household had been based on a lie she'd told herself. You've been paying for things, haven't you? Michael's voice was barely a whisper. The mortgage payments that somehow got caught up when we were behind. The utility bills that never got shut off even when we couldn't pay them. The insurance premiums. Your business loan approval last month, I added. That came through because I guaranteed it with one of my properties as collateral. The bank didn't need to tell you about the collateral, only that the loan was approved. Sarah was hyperventilating now. The medical bills from when James broke, his arm. They said there was a payment plan mix-up, that someone had already covered the balance. That was me. The car repair when Michael's truck broke down. The mechanic said some anonymous customer had prepaid the work. Also me. Michael collapsed into another chair, his head in his hands. Oh God, Mom, what have we done? But Sarah wasn't ready to accept responsibility yet. She was angry now, the kind of rage that comes when someone's worldview gets turned upside down. This is manipulation. You've been lying to us for 3 years, playing some sick game, letting us struggle when you could have helped. I was helping, I said quietly. Every month, every crisis, every time you thought you were lucky or that problems solved themselves mysteriously, that was me helping. The question is, how did you treat me while I was helping you? The kitchen fell silent, except for the sound of Sarah's labored breathing. Emma appeared in the doorway, drawn by the raised voices. Is everything okay? Grandma, why is Mommy crying? Sarah wasn't just crying, she was sobbing now, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. The weight of 3 years of cruelty was crushing down on her, and she finally understood what she'd done. I stood up and walked to Emma, kneeling down to her level. Everything's going to be fine, sweetheart. The grown-ups are just having an important conversation about family. Are you leaving us, Grandma? The question pierced straight through me. This beautiful child asking the question her parents should have been dreading instead of planning for. What do you think, Emma? Do you want me to leave? No. Her response was immediate and fierce. I love you, Grandma. You make the best cookies and you help me with homework and you read me stories. Who would do that if you left? I hugged her tight, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo, and looked over her head at Sarah and Michael. That's a very good question, sweetheart. James wandered in next, attracted by the commotion. At 7, he was less aware of the adult tensions, but smart enough to know something big was happening. Why is everyone in Daddy's office? Come here, buddy, Michael said, his voice thick with emotion. He pulled James onto his lap and held him close. We're just talking about family stuff. Is Grandma in trouble? The innocence of the question broke something in Michael. He started crying then, quiet tears that he tried to hide from his son but couldn't quite manage. Nobody, Grandma's not in trouble, Daddy and Mommy are the ones who might be in trouble. Sarah looked up from the paper she was still clutching, her mascara streaked down her cheeks. "How long?" she asked. "How long have you been planning this?" "I wasn't planning anything, Sarah. I was just living day by day, watching how my family treated me when they thought I had nothing to offer them except problems." "But you were testing us." "Yes," I admitted. "I was testing you, and for 3 years, you failed that test every single day." The words hung in the air like a judgment, because that's what they were, a judgment on 3 years of small cruelties, calculated indifference, and the steady erosion of respect and love. "What happens now?" Michael asked. I looked around the room at my family, my son who'd chosen passive compliance over defending his mother, my daughter-in-law, who'd systematically devalued my existence, and my grandchildren who'd loved me unconditionally without knowing I could give them the world. Now we decide what kind of family we really want to be. Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing her makeup further. "You could have told us. You could have trusted us." "Could I?" "Tell me, Sarah, what would have changed if you'd known from the beginning that I had money? Would you have loved me more, or would you have just hidden your resentment better?" She opened her mouth to answer, then closed it. We both knew the truth. She would have been calculating from day one, figuring out how to position herself for maximum benefit, how to ensure my money eventually flowed to their family. "I wanted to see if you could love a poor old woman who needed help," I continued. "If you could respect someone who had nothing to offer but her presence and her love for you. I wanted to know if my family would take care of me simply because I was family, not because I was useful or profitable." "And we didn't," Michael said, quietly. "No, son, you didn't." The fax machine whirred again. Patricia was sending additional information, property deeds and investment summaries that would show just how extensive my hidden wealth really was. Sarah looked at the machine like it was about to deliver her death sentence. "What now?" she whispered. "What do you want from us now?" The question hung in the air like a death sentence waiting to be read. What did I want from them now? 3 years of careful observation, 3 years of watching my own family treat me like a financial burden while I secretly paid their bills and saved their business. And now they wanted to know what I expected in return. I looked at Sarah, still clutching. Those bank statements, like they might disappear if she let go, her face a mess of running makeup and dawning horror. I looked at Michael, my only child, who'd spent 3 years choosing the easy path of silence while his wife systematically dismantled his mother's dignity. And I looked at Emma and James, innocent casualties in an adult war they never should have witnessed. "I want the truth," I said finally, "from all of us. No more pretending, no more games, no more lies of omission." Sarah laughed bitterly. "The truth? You want to talk about truth after 3 years of the biggest lie I've ever seen?" "My lie was about money, Sarah. Your lie was about love." The words hit her like a slap. She recoiled physically, and for a moment I thought she might bolt from the room entirely. But she stayed, maybe because she finally understood that running wouldn't solve anything anymore. "I never lied about love," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Didn't you? Every time you tolerated my presence while calculating my cost. Every time you smiled at me while researching nursing homes behind my back. Every time you hugged me goodbye in the morning and then called your friends to complain about supporting Harold's helpless widow. You think I didn't know? You think I couldn't hear the difference between genuine affection and performance?" Emma tugged at my cardigan. "Grandma, what's a nursing home?" The innocent question shattered what was left of the adult pretense in the room. Michael buried his face deeper in his hands, and Sarah's carefully constructed defenses finally crumbled completely. It's a place where old people go when their families don't want to take care of them anymore, I said gently, honestly. Were you going to a nursing home? Before I could answer, Michael looked up with red-rimmed eyes. We talked about it, Emmy. Daddy and Mommy talked about it because we thought Grandma needed more help than we could give her. But Grandma helps us, James piped up from his father's lap. She makes breakfast and helps with homework and reads us stories. Why would she need help? Out of the mouths of babes, 7 and 9 years old, and they understood something their parents had forgotten, that family takes care of family, not because it's profitable or convenient, but because that's what love looks like in action. Sarah was sobbing again, but this time it wasn't just shock and self-pity. This time, it was the ugly sound of someone confronting their own cruelty and finding it unbearable. I'm sorry, she choked out. Oh God, Eleanor, I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened to me. I don't know how I became this person. I know what happened, I said. You got scared. You saw an old woman moving into your space, changing your routines, adding expenses to your budget, and you panicked. Instead of seeing family, you saw a problem to be managed. The fax machine spit out another page, more financial documents, more evidence of the fortune I'd been sitting on while they calculated the cost of my prescription medications. Sarah didn't even look at this one. What would you have done, she asked suddenly, if we'd been different? If we'd been better? What would you have done with all that money? It was a fair question, and I'd thought about the answer many times over the past 3 years. I would have helped quietly, the same way I've been helping, but I also would have included you in my charitable work. I would have taught the children about responsibility and generosity. I would have made sure you all understood that wealth is a tool for making the world better, not just for making life easier. I paused, looking around the room at my fractured family. And when I died, you would have inherited everything with the knowledge and character to use it wisely. When you die? Michael's voice cracked. Mom, are you sick? Is that what this is about? I'm 72 years old, son. I'm not immortal. And this conversation became necessary because I needed to know what kind of people would be handling my legacy. Sarah wiped her nose with a tissue. And now you know. Yes, now I know. The silence stretched between us, filled with the weight of 3 years' worth of revealed truths. Emma and James were quiet now, sensing the gravity of the adult conversation, even if they couldn't fully understand it. So what happens now? Michael asked again. I walked to his desk and sat down in his chair, suddenly feeling every one of my 72 years. Now we decide if this family can be repaired or if the damage is too deep. Of course it can be repaired, Sarah said quickly. We can change. I can change. I know I've been horrible, but I can be better. Can you? Or will you just be better at hiding your resentment because now you know there's money involved? Was a brutal question, but it needed to be asked. Sarah's face cycled through several emotions before settling on something that looked like genuine despair. I don't know, she whispered. I honestly don't know anymore. I don't even recognize myself in the things you're describing, but I know they're true. I know I said those things and felt those things and... God, Eleanor, what kind of person does that make me? It makes you human, I said, surprising her. Flawed, frightened, selfish human. The question is whether you want to stay that way. I opened the desk drawer and pulled out a folder I'd prepared months ago when I first started seriously considering this confrontation. Inside were 3 envelopes, each containing a different version of my will. I've had my lawyer prepare 3 different estate plans, I said, placing the envelopes on the desk. The first one, written 3 years ago when I moved in, leaves everything to Michael and his family. The second one, written 6 months ago when I began to understand how this living arrangement really worked, leaves the bulk of my estate to Charitable organizations with trust funds for Emma and James's education and small amounts for you and Michael. Sarah stared at the envelopes like they were venomous snakes. And the third one? The third one I had drawn up last week. It leaves everything to charity except the education funds for the children. Nothing for you, nothing for Michael. Michael's face went white. Mom! Which envelope contains the version that's currently legal? Sarah asked. That depends entirely on what happens in this room, tonight, between this family. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the neighborhood where I'd been secretly supporting half the families through anonymous donations and community programs. Where I'd been the invisible benefactor while being treated like a burden in my own son's house. I'm tired, I said. Tired of pretending to be poor, tired of watching my family fail basic tests of human decency, tired of wondering if my own son loves me or just tolerates me out of obligation. I love you, Michael said quickly. Mom, I love you. I got lost somewhere. I let myself get pulled in different directions and I forgot what was important. Did you? Or did you make a choice about what was important and it wasn't your mother's dignity? He flinched like I'd hit him. That's not fair. Fair? You want to talk about fair? Was it fair when Sarah suggested I apply for food stamps while I was secretly paying your mortgage? Was it fair when you both discussed my living arrangements like I was a pet you were thinking of surrendering to a shelter? Was it fair when I had to overhear my daughter-in-law tell her friends that I was bleeding them dry while I was anonymously funding your children's dental work? Emma started crying. The raised voices and emotional tension had finally overwhelmed her, and she ran to me, wrapping her small arms around my waist. Please don't fight, she sobbed. Please don't leave us, Grandma. I don't care about money. I just want you to stay. Knelt down and gathered her into my arms. This precious child who'd loved me consistently and unconditionally while the adults in her life played their calculating games. I'm not going anywhere right now, sweetheart. But grown-ups sometimes have to have difficult conversations about important things. Are you rich, Grandma? The direct question from a 9-year-old cut through all the adult complexity and got to the heart of it. Yes, Emma, I am. Does that mean we don't have to worry about money anymore? I looked over her head at Sarah and Michael, both of whom were hanging on my answer. That depends on whether your parents have learned anything tonight. Sarah stood up suddenly, pacing to the window and back. This is impossible. How am I supposed to process this? How am I supposed to live with knowing that I've been... She stopped, unable to finish the sentence. That you've been cruel to someone who was helping you? I supplied gently. Yes, that I've been cruel to someone who was helping me. That I've spent 3 years resenting someone who was secretly saving my family. She turned to face me. How do I live with that? The same way anyone lives with their mistakes, Sarah. You acknowledge them, you genuinely change, and you spend the rest of your life making sure you never repeat them. And if I can't, if I try to change but slip back into old patterns, then you'll have proven that my second will was the right choice. The threat was implicit but clear. This wasn't just about forgiveness and family healing. This was about demonstrating genuine transformation, not just temporary shame-driven behavior modification. Michael finally spoke up. What would you need to see from us to believe that we could be the family you deserve? It was the right question, asked 3 years too late, but still the right question. Time, I said. I'd need to see sustained change over time, not just apologies and promises, but actual behavioral change. I'd need to see you both treating me with the respect you'd show any human being, regardless of what I could offer you financially. How much time? A year, maybe 2. Long enough to know if the change is real or just performance driven by financial incentive. Sarah stopped pacing. And if we pass this test, if we prove we've changed, Then we become the family we should have been all along. I help Michael rebuild his business properly. We work together on charitable projects, and I teach Emma and James about money and responsibility, and using wealth to help others. And if we fail? Then I move out, you never see me again, and you explain to your children why their grandmother disappeared from their lives. The finality of it hit them both. This wasn't just about money or inheritance. This was about whether our family could survive the truth about who we'd all become. James had been quietly listening to everything, his 7-year-old mind processing concepts too complex for his age. Finally, he spoke up. "Daddy, why were you and Mommy mean to Grandma?" The question came from such pure innocence that it demolished what was left of Michael's composure. He lifted his son from his lap and knelt on the floor so they were eye to eye. "Because Daddy made some very bad choices, buddy. Daddy forgot that being a family means taking care of each other, especially the people who love us most." "Are you going to remember now?" "Yes. Daddy's going to remember now." Sarah knelt down too, joining them on the floor. "Mommy's going to remember too, James. Mommy's going to try very hard to be the kind of person Grandma deserves." Emma wiped her eyes and looked at me seriously. "Grandma, are you going to give us another chance?" I looked at my family, all of them on their knees now, literally and figuratively, and felt something shift in my chest. The anger was still there, the hurt was still real, but underneath it all was the love that had brought me to their house 3 years ago. "Yes, sweetheart, I'm going to give us all another chance." I walked to the desk and picked up the first envelope, the one that would leave everything to Michael's family. Then I picked up a lighter from the pencil holder and set the other 2 envelopes on fire, dropping them into the metal wastebasket where they burned to ash. "There," I said. "Now there's only one will, and it says that this family trusts each other to do the right thing." Sarah started crying again, but this time it was relief and gratitude instead of shame and fear. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for giving us another chance we don't deserve." "We all deserve the chance to be better than our worst moments," I said. "Even me. Even you." Michael stood up and walked to me, his arms opening hesitantly. Would it be okay if I hugged my mother?" I stepped into his embrace, feeling 3 years of distance and resentment begin to dissolve. He smelled like the little boy who used to run to me when he scraped his knees, and for a moment, we were both just a mother and son who'd lost their way and found each other again. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered into my hair. "I'm so sorry for all of it." "I know, honey, I know." Sarah joined the hug, tentatively at first, then with growing conviction. "I'm going to spend the rest of my life making this up to you," she said. "You don't need to make anything up to me," I replied. "You just need to be genuine. That's all I ever wanted." Emma and James piled into the group hug, and for the first time in 3 years, we felt like a real family. Not perfect, not without scars, but real. Later that evening, after the children were in bed and we'd all had time to process what had happened, Sarah sat down next to me on the couch. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "What was the hardest part of these past 3 years?" I thought about it for a moment. "The hardest part was loving you all so much while feeling so unloved in return. It was watching my grandchildren grow up and knowing that their mother was teaching them by example that elderly people are burdens to be tolerated rather than treasures to be cherished." Sarah winced. "I did teach them that, didn't I?" "Yes, but children are resilient. They can learn new lessons." "What about us? Are we resilient enough to learn new lessons?" I looked at this woman who'd made my life so difficult, who'd caused me so much pain, and saw someone genuinely struggling to understand how she'd become someone she didn't recognize. "I think so," I said. I hope so. The next morning, I put on my walking shoes as usual, but this time Sarah asked if she could come with me. We walked to the chapel together, where I introduced her to Father Martinez and explained about the community programs I'd been supporting. We visited the food bank I'd been funding, the after-school program for underprivileged kids, the medical assistance fund for families who couldn't afford health care. Sarah was quiet, through most of it, taking in the scope of what I'd been doing while she'd been calculating the cost of my existence. "How do you decide?" she asked finally. "How do you choose who to help?" "I help wherever there's genuine need and an opportunity to make a real difference, but I do it quietly because charity should be about helping others, not about making yourself feel important." "Could you teach me to do this kind of work?" I looked at her, this woman who was asking to learn generosity, from someone she'd tried to discard, and felt hope bloom in my chest. "Yes," I said. "I think I could teach you that." That afternoon, Michael and I sat down with his business books and developed a plan to get his company back on solid footing. Not through bailouts or handouts, but through strategic investments and smart business. Decisions that would ensure long-term success. "I don't want you to just give me money," he said. "I want to earn it. I want to build something I can be proud of." "Good," I replied. "That's exactly what your father would have said." 6 months. Later, our family looks completely different. Sarah volunteers at the community center 3 days a week and has discovered a talent for organizing fundraising events. Michael's business is thriving, and he started a scholarship program for young people interested in the trades. Emma and James are learning about money management and charitable giving, understanding that wealth is a responsibility as much as a privilege. And me? I'm still the same woman I always was, but now I'm surrounded by a family that sees me for who I really am, not because of what I can give them, but because they've learned to love genuinely instead of conditionally. The test is over. We all passed eventually. And the best part is that now, when I look around this house that was once my prison, I see a home filled with people who choose to love each other every single day. That's worth more than all the money in the world.